The spring of 1942 on the Eastern Front of World War II opened a new window of opportunity for the warring parties. The Soviet Union was shocked by the crushing defeats of 1941, which occurred attributable to an enemy with significantly fewer soldiers and equipment. As a result of the rapid advance of Hitler's troops, Germany and its allies captured Moldova, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, almost all of Ukraine, and some western Russian regions. In addition, they besieged one of the largest cities of the USSR, Leningrad, and the German Army Group Center directed its attack on the Soviet capital. However, the Soviet troops managed to prevent the final implementation of Operation Barbarossa, and at the cost of excessive efforts and losses, inflicted a defeat on the German army in the battle for Moscow. The Soviet leadership hoped to seize the initiative by mobilizing all human and industrial resources. From June 1941 to February 1942, the USSR mobilized more than 6 million soldiers and tripled the production of military equipment. In particular, the production of aircraft increased almost 1.7 times, and the manufacture of tanks more than 4 times. Most active in the Soviet Union were the so-called T-34 medium tanks, manufactured during this period in the amount of more than 3,500. For comparison, the Third Reich during this time produced a little more than 2,500 tanks, Panzerkampfwagen III and Panzerkampfwagen IV. However, Soviet weapons were often significantly inferior to the German, because the communist industry focused primarily on quantitative indicators rather than quality. Soviet authorities believed that the main place of fighting in the spring and summer will remain the Moscow direction. In order to strengthen its position, the USSR significantly increased the number of its groups in the region and reinforced them with armored units. As a result, the Soviet army had almost twice the advantage over the enemy in soldiers and equipment. The German command was to reformat the front and finally seize the initiative against the Red Army. In addition, German forces under Erich von Manstein were to eliminate the Soviet forces in Crimea. To do this, Operation Buschard Hund was developed, according to which the Wehrmacht, with the support of the fleet and aviation, was to defeat a cluster of enemy forces in Sevastopol and on the Kerch Peninsula. In addition to military tactics, Nazi Germany faced important economic problems. The allies of the anti-Hitler coalition had more than double the total GDP and significantly more resources. In the Third Reich, the reserves of oil and petroleum products were rapidly reducing. The main oil production areas for German equipment were in Romania, which was still within range of Soviet bombers. To solve this problem, Hitler decided to capture the southwest of Russia and the Transcaucasia. Dagestan and Azerbaijan at that time produced more than 85% of all Soviet oil. After capturing these regions, Germany would not only solve its oil problems, but would deprive them of its enemy. To realize this goal, the German command developed a Case Blue, German Fall Blau. According to Directive No. 41 of 5 April 1942, the German troops, together with the Allied Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian armies, were to rapidly attack the territories from Seversky Donetsk to the Volga and Kuban and proceed to attack the Transcaucasia. To do this, the Group of Armies A and the Group of Armies B were formed. The first group was to move in the direction of the Caucasus. The second group was to overcome the resistance of the Red Army and advance to the Volga. A campaign of misinformation and deceptive maneuvers was launched to distract the Soviet army. It convinced the Stalinist generals that the main direction of the attack would be directed to Moscow through Bryansk and Smolensk. The Soviet command decided to make a preemptive strike on the flanks of the projected German offensive. In May, they attempted to capture Kharkiv. However, the 350,000-strong force of the Red Army, as a result of poor coordination and tactical failures, was completely defeated by the less numerous Wehrmacht ground forces with the active support of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. In the end, most of the Red Army were either killed or captured. It should be noted that Germany conducted an excellent reconnaissance campaign, actively using high-powered reconnaissance aircraft Focke-Wulf 189. After the destruction of the Kharkiv Group on June 28th, the German troops moved into a rapid offensive in the direction of Voronezh and Voroshilovgrad. This attack, led by Moritz von Brack and Wilhelm List, involved 56 German divisions and 22 divisions from the Allied states. The Red Army did not have time to regroup properly, and, despite a certain numerical advantage, was destroyed by rapid attacks of armored units and German airstrikes. In total, the Red Army deployed about 80 divisions on that line, 66 of which were rifle ones. The catastrophic shortage of infantry transport was the Achilles heel of the Soviet troops. As a result, the Wehrmacht was more mobile and conducted its offensive operations more quickly. Especially successful was the advance of the 4th Tank Army and 6th Ground Army of the Wehrmacht, which pushed the Soviet defenses near Voronezh and Valyuiki and quickly entered the rear of the Red Army in the Donbass. At the same time, German and Romanian units increased pressure on USSR forces from southeastern Ukraine. In order to avoid the big pockets again, the Soviet troops began a hasty retreat, but some units were nevertheless surrounded near Milerovo. The Reds' defeat was also due to Stalin's belief that the attack on Voronezh was a misleading activity and the late involvement of reserves. The defeat of USSR forces in the Voronezh-Voroshilovgrad operation, the successful offensive on the Donbass, and the rapid retreat of Soviet forces allowed the German troops to capture Rostov-on-Don. They also captured some bridgeheads on the left bank of the Don River. The communist leadership failed to stop the Wehrmacht's advance fully, but still, the German army moved more slowly than expected due to frequent, stubborn resistance of the Red Army. In particular, the German advance was made much more difficult because of the Soviet tactics of the scorched earth and destruction of land tracts. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, the Germans and their allies advanced rapidly for several reasons. Foremost, in the German army, the different branches of the army interacted much better and made decisions more quickly. Their soldiers were better equipped technically. For example, almost all infantry units were motorized and could make quick maneuvers. And there was a total advantage of the Luftwaffe. The most successful aircraft were the legendary models of Messerschmitts and Junkers. These fighters and multifunctional bombers were fast, maneuverable, and reliable enough to distinguish them from most Soviet counterparts. Interesting was the situation in the armored confrontation. The Soviet Union had much more tanks. In addition, the main Soviet tank T-34 significantly exceeded the main German tanks Panzerkampfwagen on impact capabilities, engine power, and armor strength. In German tanks, however, the crew commander did not perform other duties and was able to participate in the control of fire, which improved the detection and combat of enemy tanks. Also, the Soviet tanks had more technical defects. For example, about 80% of heavy tanks, Klim Voroshilov, went out of action due to technical breakdowns in the first year of the war. The German success was facilitated by the effective operation of the German anti-tank self-propelled vehicles, primarily the legendary Sturmgeschütz. The unfortunate defeats and rapid retreat of the Soviet troops, which in some places could turn into a panic flight, prompted Stalin to issue Order Number 227, called Not a Step Back. According to this and earlier Soviet regulations, soldiers and commanders were severely punished if they left combat positions, surrendered to captivity, or were insufficiently, in the opinion of party leaders, brave in battle. As punishment, they could be transferred to specially created penal units, imprisoned, or shot. In addition, more Soviet barrage units were created, which mainly dealt with the destruction of their own soldiers, who retreated without orders from the highest command. The German army, together with the Allied divisions, continued its offensive on Stalingrad and the Caucasus. In total, the Wehrmacht had almost 1 million troops in this area, and the German allies numbered 600,000. In August, the Soviet army numbered about 1.3 million soldiers. Stalingrad was an important strategic, industrial, and infrastructure point, through which ran supply routes to the southern Soviet Union. In early August, the 6th Infantry Army, led by Paulus, advanced 60 kilometers to Stalingrad. Heavy fighting broke out over the city. The Wehrmacht forces in the region were opposed by the Stalingrad front, led by Marshal Timoshenko. In fierce battles by the end of August, the Germans managed to reach the Volga and drive the Soviet troops back from the northwestern parts of the city in suburban battles. To help the 6th German Army from the southwest with battles came the 4th Tank Army. Aviation played a significant role in the German advance. A total of 1,200 military aircraft were used to attack Stalingrad. heavy bombardment of the Luftwaffe and German artillery caused the destruction of about 80% of city buildings. The Soviet command, at the initiative of Vasily Chuikov, used tactics consisting in maximum approximation of the line of defense with the enemy and conducting close street battles, which sometimes even reached the level of hand-to-hand skirmishes. In such a situation, the Germans could not actively use their artillery and bombers because their fire would hit the German infantry. Strategic points such as the Mamayev Kurgan and the railway station were repeatedly passed from hand to hand in incredibly hard collisions. Soviet troops were in semi-encirclement and had to transmit fresh forces, food, fuel, and ammunition to the right bank of Stalingrad via the Volga River under endless shelling. To counteract the German advance, the Red Army used sabotage units that penetrated the nearest German rear at night using sewers. These clashes the Germans called Rat War, Rattenkrieg. Soviet snipers worked successfully, the most accurate of which was Vasily Zaitsev. For both Hitler and Stalin, victory in Stalingrad was very important. Particularly, it had ideological importance because this city was renamed after a Soviet tyrant. At the cost of heavy losses on both sides, the Soviet Union managed to halt the German advance in November. At the same time, the Soviet General Staff, on the initiative of Vasilevsky, developed a strategic plan for the encirclement of the German troops called Uranus, which provided for strikes from the south and north on the flanks. These strikes were mainly concentrated on units of Romania and other Hitler's allies. For this purpose, the USSR troops were reinforced with new units and armored vehicles. The number of tanks and artillery in the Hungarian and Romanian troops per 1,000 soldiers was 6 to 9 times lower than in the Soviet Union. Therefore, on November 19th, Nikolai Vatutin's northern group of the 65th, 5th Tank, and 21st Armies launched a rapid offensive in the direction of the Kalak town. Despite resistance, the Romanian 3rd Army was completely defeated. The 51st and 57th Red Armies advanced rapidly from the south, having easily defeated the 4th Romanian Army and some units of the 4th German Panzer Army. Thus, in 3 days, up to 280,000 German troops were surrounded in and around Stalingrad. The best way for the Germans to get out of this situation would be for the encircled units to try to break through to the west and leave Stalingrad with the support of other factions. For the German group to function, more than 600 tons of food, ammunition, and fuel had to be delivered daily, but German aircraft could only supply 300. But Hitler never gave up hope of capturing Stalingrad, so he ordered the encircled group to remain in position. In response, the German command developed Operation Winter Storm. According to this plan, the German army, reinforced by some units from the Eastern Front and remnants of the Romanian armies, was to attack Stalingrad under the command of Erich von Manstein. The German units made some progress during 12 to 23 December. However, they stopped at well-fortified lines of external defense. Further offensives halted Manstein himself due to heavy losses, logistical problems, and the enemy's superiority in artillery and tank weaponry. Due to the critical delivery situation, German soldiers were threatened not only by the Soviet military, but also by starvation and cold. At the same time, the Soviet troops conducted a successful Middle Dawn operation, which, if fully successful, would jeopardize the German path. At that time, a much larger Red Army pushed parts of the Wehrmacht from the Caucasus. Having realized that the potential for the German unblocking offensive was actually exhausted, in January 1943 the Russian army passed to the implementation of the Ring Plan. With a series of rapid tank strikes supported by air, artillery, and infantry, the Soviet troops pressed the besieged Wehrmacht units to Stalingrad. Inflicting heavy losses on the Germans, the Soviet troops cut the Wehrmacht army into several groups. In this hopeless situation, Hitler contacted the surrounded commander Friedrich Paulus and promoted him to the rank of Field Marshal. In addition, the German dictator gave the order to fight to the last bullet and stressed that the German field marshals have never surrendered. The surrounded Germans, however, ran out of means and forces to fight. Therefore, in early February 1943, about 91,000 German soldiers, led by the newly appointed field marshal, surrendered. As a result, the Soviet Union lost about 1.6 million killed, captured, and seriously wounded in this epochal battle. Germany and its satellites lost about 1.5 million. The large-scale German offensive was defeated by a number of factors: critical strategic miscalculations, the weakness of the Allied forces, fierce resistance of the Red Army, lack of fuel and supplies, the advantage of the USSR in the number of armored vehicles, artillery, and partly personnel. The Soviet Union seized the strategic initiative and drove Germany from almost all of southwest Russia. Approximately 50 German and Allied divisions were either destroyed or lost more than half of their strength. Many historians consider this victory crucial and fateful for the Eastern Front, because after this defeat, Germany has not been able to fully restore the strength of its own army.